Chapter 14, Progress. The years after World War II were an age of technological progress. Jet engines replaced propellers. Reaching Mach 1 left engineers hungry to conquer Mach 2. Supersonic flight led to still faster hypersonic flight. Each breakthrough pushed the imaginations of inventors and engineers a little bit further, tempting the workers at the Langley Memorial Aeronautics Laboratory to envision a time when they eventually would create an aircraft capable of breaking free of Earth's gravity and reaching outer space. One step in this march of progress had occurred in 1947 when Langley bought its first electronic calculator from Bell Telephone Laboratories. No one confused the female calculators with the room-sized calculating machines that performed the same function. As the years passed and the electronic computers became more important to the work done at Langley, Dorothy Vaughan could envision a time when her team of human computers would be replaced by the inanimate calculating machines. The future was coming. Dorothy didn't know exactly what the new computers would look like, but she knew that technology was going to change the way things were done at the laboratory. The new machines. The electronic calculators were needed for the more elaborate research being carried out by the National Advisory Committees for Aeronautics. As planes flew faster than the speed of sound, the math required to study those supersonic flights had become increasingly complicated. Some of the algebraic equations the mathematicians were asked to perform had as many as 35 variables and might take as long as a month to solve. The new electronic calculator could complete the same problem in just a few hours. These computers were fast, but they weren't easy to use. The machines used paper punch tapes, long strips of paper with holes punched out to store data, as input and chugged along at 2 seconds per math operation, like addition or subtraction. The whole building shook when the machine was in use, but it offered the distinct advantage that it could operate all night long. The female computers needed to go home to rest. A new era. In the mid-1950s, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics bought its first computers from IBM, an IBM 604 electronic calculating punch, and an IBM 650. The engineers needed them to calculate the flight path for a hypersonic above Mach 5 rocket plane, an experimental aircraft that would fly high enough and fast enough to leave Earth's atmosphere and break the pull of Earth's gravity in order to reach space. At first, these data processing machines weren't very reliable. They made mistakes, and engineers, or the human computers who worked for the engineers, had to keep an eye on the output. In the 1950s, the electronic computers with their million-dollar-plus price tags were only used by large research facilities. They were fast, but they could still process just one job at a time. They chugged out answers around the clock, but competition for computing time remained fierce. Every engineer wanted time on the machines. Only the most short-sighted of the human computers failed to see that the electronic computers were going to dominate the future. The machines brought vast amounts of computing power and efficiency to the research process. Evolution occurred in scientific progress just as it does in nature. Positive traits continued, and obsolete ones died off. For example, propeller research had been one of Langley's most important areas of investigation at one time, but the propeller planes were replaced by faster jet engines. By 1951, the propeller tunnel was declared obsolete and demolished. Engineers who had staffed it were left to find a new specialty or retire. The same thing was going to be true of the human computers. They would have to evolve or they would become obsolete. The machines didn't immediately threaten the mathematicians' jobs, but Dorothy Vaughan realized that mastering the electronic calculators would be the key to job security. When Langley started giving classes in computer programming after work and on weekends, she signed up, and she encouraged the women in her group to do the same. Dorothy knew there would be more direct and open competition with the white computers, and African American women had to meet or exceed the standards. But she expected that those new jobs would be open to her and the other computers if they were ready. Integration is going to come, she said. She recognized that the blurring of the color lines could put her and her team in a position to qualify for the desirable jobs that were going to open up for people who were experts in managing the electronic computers. To keep moving forward, African American women needed to take advantage of every opportunity for additional training. Dorothy attended all the classes on computer programming that she could find. Langley offered a series of after-work lectures on aerodynamics there at the laboratory. Other classes were offered at Hampton Institute, the Langley Air Force Base, and the College of William and Mary, and Newport News High School. Hampton High School was the seat of the University of Virginia's Extension School, one of Langley's campuses. In the evening, Langley's top researchers taught classes to laboratory employees at the city's only public high school. But the high school was off limits to the city's African American children, who were sent to Phoenix High School on the campus of Hampton Institute. School segregation had become a red-hot topic across the country. Politicians and ordinary citizens debated the quality of its schools, especially how American students compared to Soviet students in math and science. The goal of raising the general level of technical proficiency had only grown stronger as the rift between the United States and the Soviet Union intensified. The fear of communism and spies had exploded during the period that became known as the Cold War. In the United States, the debate had expanded into a broader discussion of the participation of African Americans in the technical fields. If the United States wanted to cultivate the best and brightest students in math and science, why waste the much-needed brainpower of Black children by sending them to inferior schools? Every day, Catherine Goebel, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and other Langley computers were proving that women were as good at math as men and that African Americans were just as gifted at math as anyone else. A woman engineer, Mary Jackson, was putting her math skills to good use in her new job. From the beginning of her assignment in the wind tunnel research section, Mary's new boss, Kazimierz Sarnecki, had shown Mary how to work the controls of their wind tunnel for her group, firing up the tunnel's roaring engines and positioning models in the test section. The research in her division was used to design missiles, which were of great interest to the United States government for their possible military use. In its final form, her work became the 1958 report co-authored with her boss, Effects on Nose Angle and Mach Number on Transition on Cones at Supersonic Speeds. Mary's new boss was so impressed with her work that he suggested she enroll in Langley's engineer training program. Her ability and passion were apparent, and she had a mentor, her boss, who believed in her. It didn't matter that Mary was Black and Kaz was white. It didn't matter that Mary was a woman and Kaz was a man. It didn't matter that Mary was from the South and Kaz was from the North. What mattered was that they both loved math and they both loved airplanes. Kaz knew that Mary had the talent to be an engineer. At the time, there were very few white women who worked as engineers. The majority of Langley's female professionals, Black and white, were still classified as computers or mathematicians. There simply weren't many female engineers anywhere in the country. At the time, most of the country's top engineering schools didn't accept women. The only female engineer at Langley in the mid-1950s, Kitty O'Brien Joyner, had to sue the University of Virginia in order to enroll in the undergraduate engineering school in 1939. There were also very few African American women who worked as engineers. Mary was on her way to becoming something even rarer, an African American woman working as an engineer. In 1952, Howard University had only 2 female engineering graduates in the school's history. In fact, Mary was on track to become the first female African-American engineer at Langley. Mary's boss put her on the engineering track and promised her a promotion when she successfully completed a few advanced math courses. When she went to enroll in her courses, the obstacles she encountered came not from her coworkers, but from the local high school. Before she could get any training, Mary had to get permission to enter Hampton High School. If she had been the janitor, she would have been welcomed. As a professional engineering training, she had to petition the city of Hampton for special permission to attend classes in the whites-only school. Mary Jackson had to grit her teeth and take a deep breath before making the case to the school board that she should be allowed to attend the classes at Hampton High School. She reminded herself that she had a long-term goal and she didn't want to get sidetracked. So she swallowed her pride and asked her permission, which the city of Hampton granted. The disappointment of Hampton High School. Mary Jackson had passed the old Hampton High School too many times to count. The building was located in the middle of the city, not far from her house, but she had never set foot inside. On her first night of class in the spring of 1956, Mary was nervous. Her classmates were the same people she had worked with during the day for the past 5 years, but she was anxious about meeting with them outside of the Langley campus. The thought of entering the whites-only school also worried Mary. Nothing could have prepared her for the shock she experienced when she walked through the door. Hampton High School was a dilapidated, musty, old building. Mary Jackson was stunned. This was what she and the rest of the black children in the city had been denied all these years. She had assumed that if whites had worked so hard to deny her admission to the school, it must have been a beautiful place. But this? What a nonsensical thing that blacks and whites went to different schools. If the city had combined its resources, it could have built one beautiful school for both black and white students. Throughout the South, cities had maintained two separate and inefficient school systems, which shortchanged both black and white students. Pioneers. Being on the edge of the battle over integration was not fair for the faint of heart. Mary Jackson was friends with Thomas Birdsong, a black engineer who would come to Langley in 1952. Mary's husband, Levi, was an excellent cook, and Thomas Birdsong loved going to the Jacksons' house for dinner. The friends laughed and talked, often discussing work, and enjoyed Levi's meals. As a recent graduate of the University of Michigan, Birdsong had been assigned to a senior engineer in a wind tunnel division. His boss instructed him on how to conduct his first test, then assigned him a partner, a mechanic, to assist and answer questions. The mechanic, a white man with years of experience at the lab, sabotaged Birdsong's first experiment by incorrectly attaching the model during the test. Birdsong knew he had been undermined, but he didn't say anything. He was from the South and knew all too well that many people who would defend a white man over a black man knew all too well that many people would defend a white man over a black man in any kind of dispute. When Birdsong presented his data, his boss recognized that he had been sabotaged and was irate. "You will never do that again to this man or anyone else. Do you understand me?" the boss shouted at the mechanic. Birdsong went out of his way to remain calm at work, but keeping his anger bottled up wasn't good for him either. In general, black men at Langley were more likely to have trouble over racial issues than black women. Their good manners and gracious attitudes did not always protect them. Though the white engineers were typically polite and respectful to the black men, it was often the blue-collar mechanics, model makers, and technicians who were threatened and made the African Americans feel unwelcome. For Thomas Birdsong, the constant battle against race wore him down. Like Catherine Goebel, he found a way to opt out of the segregated facilities. Each day at lunchtime, he and a friend escaped to a black-owned restaurant just outside the entrance to the Air Force Base. There, he could be himself. Ultimately, Thomas Birdsong, Mary Jackson, and each of the other African Americans at Langley had to navigate race relations in their own way. The challenges facing black employees at the laboratory reflected the similar conflicts happening all over the country. The civil rights movement was gaining strength, and African Americans nationwide were trying to establish their rights and freedoms in the classroom, in the voting booths, and in the halls of Congress where legislative reforms were being considered. On the world stage, chilly relations between the United States and the Soviet Union kept everyone uneasy. The two world powers were vying for control of Earth and outer space, challenging one another politically and technologically. Each country wanted to demonstrate its scientific prowess and dominate the skies. The world was on the cusp of making new discoveries that would allow mankind to experience outer space. There was one central question: who would get there first?